Hello everybody and welcome to Toy to You Curator's Corner episode number 2. Today we're going to follow up on the discussion we had yesterday about the earliest historic photograph of Dunedin from 1857 and pinpoint the story of the earliest building that you can see in that image. Looking at it again here, focus on this building, the one circled, which is the Manse, from which Manse Street derives its name. Now, a manse is the name for a Presbyterian minister's home. When Thomas Burns was appointed to be the minister, the spiritual leader of the Otago pioneers, of course a building had to be provided for him, and so this prefabricated structure was sent out on the ship from Britain, probably in fact on the John Wycliffe rather than the Philip Lang, as I suggested in the first episode. But nonetheless, it was probably here by the time Burns arrived on the 15th of April 1848, the date of arrival of the Philip Lang. And the John Wycliffe had been here a couple of weeks earlier on the 23rd of March 1848, which is the day we celebrate as Otago's anniversary day. In any case, by the 26th of April, so about 11 days after he arrived, Burns was up in Dunedin and making arrangements with a building contractor, a carpenter called Henry Monson, to put the structure together, and Monson promised him that he'd have 2 rooms ready for him by the following Saturday. Now that seems rather optimistic to me, and in fact it was a full month later, on the 27th of May, that Burns came up to Dunedin from Port Chalmers, where he and the family had been staying, and slept for the first time in the manse, ready to go and give a church service in Dunedin the following day, which he did. A couple of days later, on the 2nd of June, he went back down to Port Chalmers, to the Philip Lang, where all the pioneers were mostly still on board the ship, living there. And he collected up his family, and in 2 boats they prepared to move down to Dunedin and into their new house. So it must have been a very exciting occasion for them all. They were divvied up between 2 little boats to come up the harbour. In the first boat you had Burns himself, his wife Clementine, their 17-year-old son Arthur, and their daughters Clementine, 15, and Jane, 13. And in a second boat with a couple of men to ferry them up the harbour were Annie, aged 8, Francis, aged 6, and the baby of the family, Agnes, along with the family servant, Jane Patullo. So away they went. It was a perfect day on the harbour. Everything looked peachy, beautiful sun shining, blue skies. But no sooner did they come round a point in the harbour than strong winds blew up, and the second boat was forced to take shelter in a bay. And in fact, they had to stay there overnight, the children sleeping in the bush. Wow. Imagine how that must have felt for Burns and his wife when they arrived in Dunedin to see no sign of the other boat carrying their precious younger children. So amidst that worry, they bedded down for the first time in the manse, taking all of the joy out of moving into their home, I expect. And to cap it off, it proved to be the coldest night they'd yet experienced in New Zealand. And during the night it began to snow. Burns records in his diary how fine particles of snow sifted through the boards of the house and down onto their faces as they lay in bed, and they were shivering to death because the blankets they needed were actually in the other boat. But I'm sure they didn't worry so much about the blankets as about their precious children, so it must have been a great relief to them the next morning at 11 o'clock when the men appeared through the bush carrying the children on their backs, having abandoned the boats, bashed their way through the bush tracks and delivered them safely back to their parents so they could move in to the manse. Here's a drawing of the manse with Thomas Burns, the figure you can see in front. And here's another drawing of Burns, pictured as he was so often seen in those days, carrying a walking stick and with a document case under his arm. And here's another one of him from a cartoon by James Brown that shows Burns wearing a Geneva cap, which is a distinctive style of headgear that made the minister very recognisable as he walked about Dunedin in the early days of the Otago settlement. So that's the story of the manse and of the Burns family's rather dramatic experience of moving into it in June 1848. Now if you look at this photograph, you can see the note at the bottom which tells us that the manse was on the site of the Grand Picture Theatre. Well, that was later called the Century Picture Theatre and it's now been demolished. But it is in fact the site of the present day car park beside Chipmunks in Princess Street, as you can see on this map here. And that location is also confirmed by this 1855 survey map from Toitu's collection, where you can see the building marked number 2, exactly at that point, and confirmed here as being the house of Rev Thomas Burns. So I hope you found that interesting as a wee follow-up to yesterday's story. and another way in which we can explore our past as we go through this rather dramatic period of being shut in at home. But we don't need to be shut into our limited experiences. We can break out the back and explore the vast array of Dunedin history.